we're making our way through. And in the last class, we kind of covered an important aspect of what this work is. This work is about liberation. This work is about realizing that there's something beyond our moment-to-moment, experiences of this physical world. Like there's something beyond that. And we were given certain practices, the method of meditation, the fact that we have to essentially get to a place of no mind, a place where all of these objects and all of these, I guess, external objects and, all of our internal objects too, in the form of thoughts and emotions, all of those kind of merge, you could say. The language always falls short, but essentially our attention is no longer on those things. And because they're no longer on those things, they're unavailable for us to experience. And when that happens, we see that there is something other than the objects that we are constantly paying attention to. So that's kind of the process. And we use meditation as a way to practice this on the state of meditation, but then also in our day-to-day, we want to use this as a way to build our ability to focus on one thing. So having like single pointed attention, for example, consciously doing one thing at a time and focusing on just one thing that is in front of us. And what that does is it works in the same way where we are not regarding all of the background noises, all of the thoughts that that keep coming up, and we're building this ability for the mind to just pay attention to one thing. And because we have this ability to do that, our meditation is going to bear a lot more fruit, because it's going to get stronger and stronger, where we can sort of have that experience of no mind. And the reason why we are unable to perceive it ordinarily is because of all of the stuff, because our senses have been designed to pay attention to things. So our energy is always sort of going outside, going on the objects of this world, going on my thoughts, going on my feelings. And that's just the way it's built, right? Like there's no changing that faculty. But what we can change is what we pay attention to. We can't not pay attention. Like that's just, attention is something that is just a part of us, part of our being. But we can pay attention to things not externally, but we can start to pay attention to where is it that my source of this attention comes from. And once we start turning our mind to the inside, we start to notice that these objects that I constantly thought were permanent to some degree are not as permanent as I thought they were. There could be moments where these objects are unavailable. And we realize that they have appeared moment to moment, and they are held in place because of our attention, because of our, we learned the word vasanas, which are like these deep impressions of the past. And, we have these desires and we want to fulfill them. And we have these vasanas, which kind of interplay with that and keep these objects in place. So that's where we're at. And we're going to make our journey along this book. So let me share my screen. I think we stopped at verse 42 last week. So let's do verse 43. And I guess let's maybe just like go over what 42 was talking about. So so this one says, we are churning together the lower aspects of the self with the higher aspects of the self. And that's essentially saying that, we have this mind, and we have this mind which is full of desires, and we want to exhaust these desires. So it's not so much about suppression, and it's not so much about, ignoring them. It's all about seeing for what they are. These desires exist in us, and we can either go through with them and do it consciously, so that once we go through with them, we exhaust them. Or the other aspect, which is through insight, we can kind of, the word is like we can dissolve them, or we can um, I guess, yeah, dissolve is a great word. So essentially desires get dissolved so that they are no longer something that we want to do. So a great example is like when we were 5 years old, we loved playing on a tricycle, right? And that was like the best thing ever. But then the moment a bicycle came into our experience, it's not like we suppressed the desire for the tricycle, or we had to like ignore the bicycle. It's just that the desire just fell off. It no longer was something that was worth pursuing. And then the bicycle was when we were 8 or whatever. So that's kind of the mechanism, which is, it's not about so much that you're going to have to suppress it. It's more about, it's no longer something that interests me. And you can do, once we consciously do something and we go through with the desire, you will start to see that actually these desires and the energy of these desires reduce. It's only when we are unconscious and we experience things in the world do we kind of build those desires and they become stronger. So start to notice that when you're consciously experiencing the world, and you're consciously fulfilling whatever desire that you have, the energy of it starts to dissipate, because we see that it's me that is actually why I feel good when I'm experiencing this desire, or when I'm experiencing the object of the desire. So I want ice cream, and when I eat the ice cream, for a moment my mind is free from desire, and that's the feeling that I really want, which is the feeling of being free from desire. It's just that I use the ice cream, I use the partner, I use the approval, I use the job. All of those things are means to get to this place. And once we start to see that, through experience and through our own direct experience, that is like, moment to moment, we start to notice this, we will see that, yes, this is true. And don't take any of this at my word, or at this book's word. See for your own self that this is true, and be a scientist, or and see that this is true or not true. And if it's not, disregard it. But if it is, then make use of this. So that's kind of how we want to look at this. So let's do the next one. Aruneneva bodhena purvam santam ahisrite tata avir bhaved atma swayam eshamu aniva. So just as the sun rises, soon after the Lord of the early dawn, Aruna, has dispelled the thick darkness that existed before, so too the self manifests on its own accord, once the right knowledge has dispelled ignorance. So it's not like the self isn't something that is created. So self is always shining. And then, usually we all have this point where we have this doubt, which is, if it's always shining, then why isn't it perceivable? Why do I have to go through this elaborate process of meditation and discipline and all these things, which require a lot of patience and attention and energy? Why do you have to go through it if it's always there? And the reason is because there is this sort of covering where, in the place in our mind where we can have this aha, this place where we sort of recognize things, and this recognition is sort of covered. So we cannot recognize that the self is always on, and the reason is because our attention is always on something else. And if our attention is on something else, I cannot perceive the self. So, a great example is like, if I say, pay attention to your sensation of the pants that you're wearing on the waist right now. So you can focus your attention and see, oh yes, I can feel that. But if my mind is not paying attention to that, I will not perceive it, right? So we have to kind of look at something for it to be perceivable. If you're not looking, we're never going to perceive it. So the same way, the self, we have never had the insight or like the desire to even look at it. And even if we do have a desire to look at it, there are too many other objects in my view that grab my attention. And because of this, I'm unable to look at it. All I need is certain amount of time, which is free from any other objects, to be able to say, yes, this is the self. And it's not like you're going to see it as an object. It's just that the lack of any other objects will, it will reveal its quality and its characteristics. So that's kind of why the self isn't perceptible all the time. And the fact that it shines on its own accord or manifests on its own accord is something that you can validate yourself right now. So for example, if I ask you, do you exist? And I think everyone would say yes. And do you say, how do you exist? Like, do you need something else for you to have this sort of sense of awareness that you have? Every morning, do you have to drink something to be able to have this awareness? It just is. You may have low energy because you haven't eaten food, or you may have your body may feel tired because you haven't slept. All of those are experiences of the body and the mind maybe, but the sense of existing is always there. It's there on its own accord. That's kind of what this means, that it shines by itself. And because it shines by itself, it's just revealing things for us. So all we do is we remove things from from the experience. We remove the physical world, we remove the mental world, and what remains is this self. And this being, you could say, we are a human being. So this being is something that exists before our experience. And once we remove stuff, this being shines. So, and the perception of this being happens. So this is the right knowledge that we gain through our mind, and then through practice and through our, striving, the ignorance kind of dispels automatically. Any thoughts about this? Okay, here's the next one. Atma tu satatam prapto yaprapta vividhyaya tannasho praptavad bhati swakanthabharanam yatha. So Atman is an ever-existing reality, yet because of ignorance, it is not realized. Therefore, as soon as the ignorance is dispelled, the Atman is realized. It's like the missing ornament of one's neck. So here we're kind of continuing the same idea, which is that, the Atman, which is the self, the being, you, I, all of these are words that we use to describe this awareness that we have. Or not even we are this awareness. So this is ever true. There's no time when we are not aware. And this is an ever existing reality. But because we never notice this fact, because our attention is on something else, it's not realized. And for some of us, we can take this idea and we can notice this and we can say, oh yeah, that's true. And that's the kind of the end, you could say. But for a lot of us, what happens is that the objects of the world are just always grabbing at us. So even though we may get this knowledge from like an intellectual standpoint, and we may have moments where we see that this is true, maybe in our meditation, still, the mind doesn't lose its grip on the world. And the only solution to that is, continuing to practice and continuing to get to this place where this entire world dissolves for a certain amount of time. And in this period, while we're experiencing it, it feels like a timeless state, but we directly experience the self, in its truest form, which is without any other objects in its perception. So it's kind of like I am the subject, I is the object, and I is the experience. So kind of all of the three factors that we remember we had in the previous classes, where we have every experience has a subject, object, and the experience itself. So in this state, the subject is I, the object is I, and the experiencer is also I. So all the three things becomes like this one non-dual consciousness that we are experiencing. And in this state, we have this clear perception because there's unblemished by anything else. And a lot of us need this state because otherwise the mind is just never going to accept it. So this is kind of where we kind of keep practicing and keep putting our energies into this work and dropping, and I guess, sublimating or dissolving or exhausting our vasanas and our desires, because those are the desires which keep the mind in place. Because if we think that I want the job, I want the money, or I want the approval, I want the happiness, whatever some external thing is, our mind is going to be going there. So until that desire is not dissolved, the mind is going to be held in place. So that's, and once the mind dissolves, it's automatically realized. And the example here is, the missing ornament on one's neck. So kind of like, the modern example is like, I lost my phone, right? And it's like, where's my phone? I can't find it. And maybe it's in your back pocket, right? So, and you've been looking all over the house and, thinking that you've lost it. But then, you just check your back pocket and you're like, there it is. So it's like, it was never missing in the first place. It's just that I thought it was, I thought I had lost it, but it was always there. And only by checking and saying, yes, it is, like, in the case of the ornament, it's like, oh yeah, it's on my neck. But I thought it was all over the place. I kept asking other people. I was looking for it in the world. All of the activity that I would do to find it, but then it was always there. I had never lost it. So finding the Atman is kind of like that, which is, it's always been there. Whatever I was seeking, in the world, through the form of objects, is no doubt that, everything has different experiences. So like finding a job feels different than, finding a partner, which feels different from, getting the approval of somebody else. All of those are experiences that we're seeking, but the essence of those experiences is that I think it's going to make me happy. And what's happening is, in those moments when we experience happiness, we are experiencing the bliss of the self, not the bliss of the object, because the objects by themselves are, void, you could say, or like, shunyata is kind of the word we hear in Buddhism, for example. But essentially, they have no problem. They're qualityless, because if they did have joy-giving properties, then everyone would go for the same object. But if you look at the world, everyone has their own bundle of desires. So it's clear that the objects, are inherently neither joy-giving nor misery-producing. It's like my sort of attention and my desires which make it so. So that's kind of what we are doing here, which is creating my world is created by me, and the world kind of dissolves because of me. So that gives us great confidence, which is that all of my effort that I put into this work is fully dependent on me, and the result is also going to be dependent on me. So nobody else is required for this work to be fruitful, which is great news, because to get the cooperation of somebody else is very difficult. But just to get the cooperation of this mind and is easier. So the work is going to involve getting rid of these objects, in my experience, for a moment, and to see that there's something beyond. And once that is seen, then that's always perceivable, because that's it's like if you've ever seen those I would say, what's the word? It's not a puzzle, but it's kind of like an illusion where you have two images in a single image, and you can either see one or you can see the other. So an example is like a face and a cup, or a grail, and like you can either see the face or you can either see the cup. And in the beginning, if it's like the first time you're seeing it, you either see one or the two. But once you've seen both, there's never a point where you cannot see either, right? Like you're like, all right, I can always see it. So it's kind of like that. Once you've seen the Atman, there's never a time where you can unsee it, because it's there all the time. It's just that we have never seen it and grasped what it is. Any thoughts about this? Okay, let us do the next one. Sthanau purusha vadabhrantya ya krita brahmani jivata jivasya tatvike rupe tasmin drishte nivartate. So just as a post appears to be a ghost, Brahman appears to be a jiva because of ignorance. The egocentric individuality is destroyed when the real nature of the jiva is realized as the self. Okay, so here is a very sort of common analogy, or not even so much of an analogy, but it's our experience. Like, when we are at night, maybe we've gone out like dancing or hanging out with friends, and now we're like going back home, and we're walking on the street, and you notice, the street lights are off. It's kind of dark. You can't really see very clearly. So you're walking, maybe going back home, and you see in a distance that there's this shadow looking figure, and you think it's like some mugger in the distance, and you kind of get terrified, and maybe you've had an experience in the past where you've got mugged, and all of those emotions are coming back and replaying that incident, and you're starting to your heart is racing, your anxiety is increasing, all of these things are happening, and you're thinking of what to do, who to call. Maybe you should call your friend and maybe chat with them while you're walking, whatever. All these things are happening, right? And then a car goes by, with its headlights on, and you realize that actually that thing is not a human. It's a post, like a lamppost. And then all of those fears and those anxieties and the stress, all of that dissolves. It's gone. And what has happened? It's like knowledge has dawned on you that, oh, this is actually not what I thought it was. It's not a mugger. It is just a inert pole. So because of this knowledge, so the key here is that I didn't have clear perception of what something is, and on this unclear perception, I projected my own sense of fears and my own sort of memories or whatever, my own mind's complexities I projected on this object. And for me it could have been a mugger. For somebody else it could have been something else, and everybody has their own sets of fears and complexities, and this is constantly being projected onto the world, which is why my world is very different than your world. So this is going on all the time. But once we see what something is really, if I see that this is actually a pole or a post, then all of that kind of disappears. So once this happens, if we perceive Brahman, so now we're talking about the self. Until now, I think that the ego personality is real, the real in the sense that that's who I am. I am this body, I am the mind, I am my bundle of memories. That is what I think, and because of this firm belief, just like the firm belief that that pole or that post is a mugger, because of that firm belief, there are all sorts of additional thoughts or additional experiences that get created. So the experience of fear, the experience of heart racing, all of that are sort of consequences of this misunderstanding. And this world and my own sort of moment to moment experience is a consequence of certain assumptions, the assumptions that I am limited to these things. The moment these assumptions are broken, and how do they break? It's because of my clear perception, not in like, by reading a book or like, listening to, somebody say something, but my own looking. It's like, I have to look, who am I really? Am I this body? Am I this mind? And my own perception. And once this individuality is sort of recognized to be false, then it's destroyed because I see something else to be true. And just like I saw the pole isn't a pole, and it's something, the human isn't a human or isn't a mugger, and I see it's a pole, it's automatically gone. Like I don't have to create additional sort of effort for it to happen. So that's the same way that this thing works. So any thoughts about this one?
So I had a question. Excuse me. What does jiva mean then?
Good question. So jiva is essentially the word we use to indicate this individuality in us. So you could say, maybe the English word is like the ego or the identity, or the limited, the human that I am, who I think that I am. That's the word we use to this. That's what jiva means.
Okay.
And so right now I think that I am limited to my body, right? Or I may be limited to my personality or my my intellect. So those are sort of like where my identity is, and jiva is sort of, so I guess so there is this word called so jiva is like the physical form, so like the human, like the personality or the human body. But there's another word which is coming to my mind, which is jiva bhavana, which is more like it's an attitude of feeling like a person. So you could say there's a mapping of like jiva to like a personhood, where I feel like I'm a person, and that is a false feeling according to this word, which is it's a moment-to-moment experience where I feel like a person, and this feeling kind of rises and falls. And we can prove that, which is, if you're in a, let's say you have a fear of, let's say, public speaking, and somebody like asks you to like stand up and say something in front of 100 people without any heads up, this sort of thickness of this, feeling like a person increases, right? Like we all have that feeling of feeling very self-conscious. So that's kind of like, this jiva bhavana, you could say, or feeling like a person. And in this opposite side, which is when I'm very engaged in a project, or I'm hanging out with friends who I love hanging out with, or I'm going in nature and just like really happy to be there. In those moments, this jiva bhavana kind of like is very thin, where I don't even think I'm a person because I'm so lost in the activity. So that's kind of the that's what jiva kind of indicates. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I guess I'm obviously imagining things to, if I were to, I don't know, these aren't going to be the right words, but if I were to become Atman or to see Atman, does my personality disappear? I mean, because I still see people and they're all different, like you talked about, my bundle of desires and vasanas create a certain way that you go through life, and if you reach or see Brahman or whatever the right word is for that, then you would think that everyone becomes the same. There would be no variability, and you know where I'm going with this? I'm just like, do I become not me?
Yeah. So no, it's more like you see that you are not just that. Like that's an aspect of you, but you are beyond that. So it's like saying that, for a long time I believed I was my car. Like if you were like kind of like a crazy person, you may just believe you're a car. Like, like that is your entire identity. But then somebody comes up to you and says, hey, you're not a car. You have a body. You are separate from it. You have your own sort of thoughts and all of that. See, that's true for you. And then that doesn't change, like, and then let's say that person has this, oh yeah, that's actually true. That doesn't change the fact that they still have a car, and they can still use it and go around. It's not like the car disappears. It just changes the relationship to the car. So if, let's say, it gets somebody like, hits the car by accident or whatever, it doesn't destroy them, right? It's like, it's okay, I can fix it. Like that could be the attitude after. In the same way, once you realize you're not the body and the mind, it doesn't mean your body and mind disappear. It's like, your relationship to it changes, where you can go through the world with a little distance, where, you can still do the same things, you can still enjoy the same things, or you may still have the same responsibilities, but the flavor kind of changes, where there's a different playground where your attention can be. It's no longer just limited to the body and the mind. And it can go to the place where, where it's the most blissful. And our attention can go there, and it can come back when we need to do stuff, but it can go back there. And right now, most of us, we don't have access to this place because we have never seen it, even though it's there all the time. It's like, it's kind of paradoxical. It's like so close yet so far. It's closer than the that's why we have words like it's closer than the closest and further than the furthest, because it's here right now, and it's out there everywhere. So these sort of paradoxical language confuses people, but once we start to notice what this means, then these words start to become a living experience in us. Does that help?
Very much so. It reminds me of I knew this guy always said it, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. But you don't know. One last comment was just kind of ties into what we've been talking about before. And you referenced the post here, and I always wondered, what is a post like? So lamp post so I get that now. But earlier this week, the cat dragged one of my wife's black necklaces downstairs and was playing with it and left it by the front door. And I came down the steps and went around the corner, and just out of the corner of my eye, I saw this black thing laying on the floor. And for a split second, it was like, that is a snake. And at this almost like instantaneously, it was like, it's not possible for that to be a snake. And I, look at it, and it's like, that is a necklace. And it was just one of those moments where it's like ironic that we talk about the snake and the rope. And so I don't know, that was all. I just wanted to share that.
Change the metaphor to snake and a necklace. That will work too. Nice. But there you go. Like, that's kind of what's happening all the time. Like, the snake and the necklace is like so gross, where it's like so obvious, but even subtle things where we use memory and project, what a person would do, or what a person is like all these subtle aspects of projecting our own sort of ideas and thoughts on other people. That happens all the time too. And we can start to notice that as we get a little bit more subtler and subtler. But great, awesome that this is happening. Cool, let's do the next one. Tattva swarupanubhavat utpannam jnanamanjasa aham mameti cha jnanam badhate digbrahmadivat. So just as right information removes the wrong notion about the directions, so too the knowledge that is gained as a result of the experience of the truth destroys the ignorance that is characterized by the notions of I-ness and minus. Okay, so here we're kind of given what happens, like how does this work, right? Like, why is it that this process even works? And the reason is because it's all about seeing and having the right knowledge about something, because until you have that, you cannot know anything. It's like we are sort of beings which have the ability to know things, and the only way we can know something is by gaining knowledge about it. And then the only way we can gain knowledge about something is by paying attention to something, or seeing it for what it is. Until then, it's going to be borrowed knowledge, or indirect knowledge, which is like, somebody's opinion or something you may have read. And those are not real knowledge, right? Like I can read all about what an apple tastes like. I can read all about what, going to, Half Moon Bay is like it's a beautiful sunset, has like, the wind on my face, the water being cold, all of that I can read about it, but until I go there, I wouldn't know what it really is. So, we always talk about gaining a direct experience of the truth. And, we start with indirect knowledge, which is, through reading a book or going to a class or like talking to a teacher. But finally, we want to use those sort of ideas and apply it to our own life so that we can experience this ourselves. And no amount of reading is actually going to give you the answer, because this is beyond the mind. It's like you're trying to use a tool which is like book knowledge to access something which is beyond the book. It is never going to happen. So the only way you can do this is like by assimilating this intellectually and understanding that this is the process, this is how it works, and then doing it, and then seeing it and paying attention in our own experience. Because the moment we're reading a book or paying attention to something external, our attention is on an object again. So start to see that it's not so much about reading or like external stuff. It's all about internal experience. So like, can I pay attention to what's happening to me, to this bundle of thoughts, and see that where is this sort of experience originating from? So that's kind of the process. And then once we see this clearly without any external influences with other objects, this sort of destroys this ignorance. And what is this ignorance? Where we have this limited identity, right? Which is like, this is I-ness and minus is the way we sort of talk about this ego, that I think I'm a person, what about me? What about my needs? What about my feelings? All of those things are impediments, unfortunately, which get in the way. Because, we talk about Western psychology, and, if you understand how Western psychology works, it's like it's only operating in the realm of the mind. So it can take you from being a broken personality to maybe a acceptable personality, which is a socially acceptable personality, right? I feel like all of Western psychology is catered to becoming an acceptable human being according to the average, acceptance criteria of society. The moment you kind of stray away from any of like the median or like the average, you are classified with some disorder. And all of society, all of the psychology is working to get you back to that average. That may work for some people, but it doesn't free them, because you're still in the mind, you're still operating in that realm, and it's a never-ending cycle. This, on the other hand, goes beyond. It tells you, do not don't look at stuff, because psychology is saying, look at your mind, look at your feelings, look at your needs, look at how other people are, how you get affected by other people, and take care of those things. This is saying, forget all of those things, go beyond. See where is this experience coming from. And because we go beyond, then the world will be what the world is. The world is full of people, and it's like God, it's always going to have joy producing objects and misery producing objects from a level of the world. There's going to be some experiences where you will get what you want, and there'll be some experiences where you won't get what you want, because it takes a lot of cooperation to get what you want. If you want something external, if you want a job, there's like maybe hundreds of other people who want the same job, so you may or may not get it. If you want that promotion, same thing, right? If you want to be famous in a specific endeavor, also the same. There's always going to be reasons to not be successful. So that's never going to change. But what can change is my view of it and my relationship to it. So So, so essentially, going back to this verse, all of this work results in the experience of the truth, and automatically this ignorance kind of drops. And we are free then. We're free from these notions of I-ness and minus, because there is a different playground where we can go to. Any thoughts about this? Okay, let's do the next one. Samyagni Jnanavan Yogi Swamanye Vakhilam Jagat Ekam Cha Sarvamatmanam Ikshate Jnana Chakshusha. So the perfect yogi of realization and enlightenment sees through their eye of wisdom, Jnana Chakshu, the entire universe in their own self, and regards everything as their own self and nothing else. Okay, so here, what happens after realization, and what happens after enlightenment? And here we are given the perfect yogi. So, this process is called yoga. Unfortunately, like the Western understanding of yoga is in the earlier 19th or 20th century was all about doing the postures and getting into crazy bodily positions, and that's not what yoga is all about. Yoga, it's actually not what yoga is about. Not even not. It's a very small slice of yoga, which is to have a physically fit body. And once you have a physically fit body, you move on to something greater than that, and not just remain in the realm of being physically fit, because that's a very tiny slice of our experience. We have a fit enough body so that we can go into realms of being able to sit still in meditation. That's the only purpose of doing the physical asanas, which is to have a body fit enough to sit still for some amount of time. So we are striving, we are doing yoga. So this is Jnana Yoga, where we are working from the mind, and we're given certain ideas that kind of change our mind and essentially dissolve our mind. And what remains is the self. And there's different kinds of yoga. So, so a person who has followed all of the sort of methods and, processes that we have learned so far, at some point will have this sort of realization. And it's a realization, it's not an attainment. We don't attain the self. We realize that it was always there, because it's always on. It's just that we don't perceive it. And through these steps that we have learned, there will come a time when we will perceive it. And once we perceive it, then I think, Steve, you were mentioning what would happen. Would my body disappear, everything disappear? We start to see that the world is nothing but is the self. Like right now I had my limited understanding that only this body is me. But after realization, you realize this entire universe is me, essentially. And not from me in the sense of this, I would say, it's the, what's the word? The fundamental material of this universe is the self. Like the same consciousness that I have, or I am, the same awareness, the same context, or the same background in which all of my experiences happen. The mind space, you could say. There's so many words that we can use to describe this, but essentially that context, the same context extends infinitely in all directions. How, I think we did this thing last week where it's like, how far do you think you can see? If you had the best eyes, you can probably see infinitely. And how far can you hear? So there is this context in which all of these experiences are happening. And it's infinite in all directions. And that sort of context and this background, this awareness is the self. And that changes, and it appears as a physical object. It appears as a thought. So if I close my eyes and if I think of like a small pea green pea, I can do that. If I close my eyes and think of a massive elephant, I can do that. If I close my eyes and think of a massive mountain or like a gorge, I can do that. So, the elephant isn't different from the pea, isn't different from the mountain in terms of the material that was used to create that experience. Even though they appear different, the material is the same. So similarly, this world, even though it appears different, diverse, full of like, different kinds of things and different kinds of people and animals, all of that, but the material cause is the self. And this is sort of the realization that happens. So even the body that I have or that you have is made of the same material. It just is a little bit more grosser than a thought. Or like if I have an image of having a six-pack, let's say, I can close my eyes and think of the fact that I have a six-pack, and that body is a lot more subtle because it isn't as concrete as this physical body that I have. And like, a little bit more energy has to be applied to convert that mental body and image that I have into reality, which is I maybe have to go work out and all of that, and then I will have a six-pack potentially. Unlikely, but so that's kind of how we want to see this world. And this is actually a consequence. So it's not so much of something that we can practice, but this is what will happen after realization. So notice that when we started the class, we spoke about the subject-object discrimination, which is I am the self, everything else is the not self. I am the one who's looking at stuff, so I am looking at my body, I'm looking at the world. Like I can clearly say that I am not my phone. I'm the one who's looking at the phone. So we went through this process of like subject, object, and clearly seeing that I am not what I perceive. I am separate from what I perceive. And this was to get to a point where I can clearly see that, oh, I am this self, and this self is always shining. And this is a method. Like all of these are methods that we use to kind of get to a place. And once we can clearly see that this self is on, shining all the time, moment to moment, it's on, it's on, it's on. And once we recognize that, then we start to answer the second question, which is, what is this world? Because now I know who I am, but then I want to know what this world is. And that's where this one is kind of like tending towards, which is, this world is nothing but me. It's nothing but the self. And not me from a sense of like my body or my personality, but me in the sense of like this awareness. The world is my awareness. So I think if you've ever like looked at like a Zen koan, it says, you are not separate from the world. And this is exactly what that kind of refers to, which is like, I am not separate from this world. Like my world and me appear at the same time. So if you see somebody who is in your world, you have a thought about that person, it's because you are sort of creating that for you. So like if I don't pay attention to that person, for my own experience, that person doesn't exist. So all of the things that I'm paying attention to is sort of self-created. A person who's living in like a forest lives in a very different world than a person who lives in, let's say, in New York or in San Francisco or in Austin, wherever, right? And each of them have their different world subjectively. So we want to start to see that, which is like my world and me, my ego isn't separate. It is the one and the same. So we're kind of maybe going a little bit in a tangent, but the idea is that, the self, we answer sort of two questions. Who am I? And then the second question is, what is this world? And we want to start to see the self in everything. So like if you're walking on the street and you're seeing the bus, it is nothing but the self appearing as the bus. If you're walking on the street and you look at a beautiful like sunset, it's nothing but the self appearing as the sunset. And this sort of like seeing the self through everything will sort of keep taking our mind to the place of the self. Remember, I said there's a different playground where we can go to. And if we keep going to that place, then, you know, life is, we're sort of going to start to get more and more rooted, you could say, in being able to access that place in every moment, because the self is on all the time. It's just that we forget, or we just get too lost in whatever is happening in front of me, and we kind of go off center. So you want to keep coming back to that center of living from that place and living from that self. Any thoughts about this? Okay, let's do one more. Atmavedevam jagat sarvam atmano anya na vidyate mrido yad vadha da dini swatmanam sarvamikshite. So the tangible universe is verily the Atman itself. Nothing whatsoever other than the Atman exists. Just as pots and jars are verily made of clay and cannot be anything but clay, so too for the enlightened person, all that is perceived is the self. All right, so continuing on that same idea, the universe is the self, is the Atman. Why? And we can go through like a very logical sort of explanation from for it. So if we are, you know, trying to make something, and you know, something which is made out of pure clay, if clay is the fundamental material for it, we can, you know, I can make a vase, I can make a, you know, like a doll, I can make a cup, I can make all these different objects, and I can use language to say this is a cup, this is a pot, this is a clay doll, but in the end, the material is that it is nothing but the clay. So logically, you know, from a clay dough, I can never produce a gold cup. Like, you know, that's just the law of this universe, which is from one material, you cannot get another material. And similarly, if everything has, you know, before the Big Bang, or, you know, there was certain material that existed, and that material was used to sort of, you know, create this entire physical world of objects. And even though they appear different, the material is still the same. You know, we also have the physical law, which is energy can neither be created nor destroyed, which kind of like tends towards the same idea, which is things are always using the same fundamental material, and it's transforming and it's changing. And what this says is one level further, which is it's just an appearance. And an appearance doesn't mean that it's like not an experience or it's not valid for a certain amount of time. It just means that it exists for some amount of time and then it's gone. Like it's temporary, you could say. So this body right now is an appearance in the self for some amount of time until, you know, the energy that's holding this body in place is exhausted, and then it's gone. Similarly, if I have this cup, I don't know if you can see it, but this cup was not there like maybe 10 years ago, and this cup will not be there when I break it, or when, you know, what it breaks on it by itself. You know, let's say it doesn't break, but over like, let's say 1,000 years, it will potentially dissolve. So there's always some amount of energy holding something in place, and until that energy exists, it's going to be there. And once it starts to decay, it will start to break down. And that's true for this entire world. And once we clearly see that, yes, I am the self, it's not just a theoretical concept. So right now, the physical law that energy can neither be created nor destroyed is a very theoretical concept. It's an intellectual concept. because we have not had the direct experience of it. And until we have direct experience of something, it'll just be some idea. We can say it in a party and feel very smart about it, but we have absolutely no clue what that means. So once we have a direct experience of the self, that becomes like a living proof of that idea. And it's no longer just like something you have to remember that, oh yeah, there is a physical law which says energy is always created and is never created nor destroyed. Like, it becomes a living reality. Just like if someone were to ask you, what's it like to be a human being? You don't have to read a book. You don't have to remember. You just look at it and you just answer the question, right? It's an immediate living experiential answer. It's not like a memorized answer, because the knowledge is direct. And that's the kind of knowledge that we are talking about, is direct knowledge. So this universe is nothing but the self. And take it on as a hypothesis and prove it in your own direct experience, or disprove it, either. But don't take it as like just another idea that you can kind of like feel happy that you know, right? It's not about acquisition of knowledge, but it's about direct experience. So always have that in the back of your mind. Any thoughts about this one? Okay, let's do one more. Jivan muktastu tadvidvan purvopadhi gunam satyajet satchitananda rupatvat bhavet brahma rakitavat. So liberated soul, endowed with self-knowledge, gives up the traits of his previously explained equipments, upadhis, and because of his Sat Chit Ananda nature, he verily becomes Brahman, as the worm transforming into the wasp. Okay, so there's a word here which is Jivan Mukta, which is a very, I would say, important word used in this part of the world, which is essentially a person who has realized the self while living. So, mukta is the word which we use for liberation. So like it kind of has parallels to the word nirvana or moksha, self-realization. So that's what mukta is. And jivan is like while living. So he or she is alive, and they've realized the self while living. So because they've realized the self, due to self-knowledge, and endowed is something that, it's like, now I am able to see the self moment to moment all the time. It's kind of like, that illusion where you can see the vase or the face. So now I've seen both. So I can see the world kind of, and I can see the self as well. So I can access both at any time. And because the identity now has shifted for this person, they are no longer identified with the world, which includes their physical body and their mind and their personality. They give up the traits of their personalities. They no longer say, I am stupid, or I am smart, or I am fat, or I am thin, or I am, successful, or I am not successful. All of those were qualities of, the body or the equipments. And because they clearly see that they are not the equipments, the identity is gone. So it's kind of like, the analogy of like, when I was a kid, I really protected my bike, because I thought that was, who I am. Like, all my friends thought my bike was cool. So like I was very sort of identified with the bike, but I am not that. And, as I grew older, my identity with the bike kind of dissolved. So in the same way, like once I find something which is greater, my identity with the lower automatically dissolves. And because of their Sat Chit Ananda is essentially the words we use to describe the qualities of the self, which is, Sat is truth, Chit is, existence itself or consciousness, and Ananda is the bliss. So all of these three things is what we are sort of seeking, we are seeking something that is blissful, or like we're seeking ecstasy, and we're seeking having this feeling of being alive, right? Like of existence. We are seeking something that is true. And our mind is always agreeing with those things when we encounter them in the physical world. When we see a beautiful sunset, when we hear a beautiful poem, or when we hear beautiful music, all of those experiences take us to a certain place. And that place, we experience these qualities, truth, existence, and bliss. And for the person who is realized, this is happening, this is accessible moment to moment. And he verily, becomes Brahman. Like I would say, more of like, it's a realization. So language always falls short. So it's not like you become it. It's more like you realize that you are it. And and the example here is the worm transforming into the wasp, which is kind of like a incorrect understanding of what happened back in the day. So in the context of this book was written 1,000 years ago, like 1,500 years ago, so, or 1,200 years ago to be precise. And back in the day, they kind of used to notice that a worm becomes like trapped in, I guess not really a worm, but like maybe it was an like a was it pupa or something, like, which was like in the wasp's den, or the wasp's house. And because of certain processes, it becomes a wasp eventually. So like the idea was like, the worm was always paying attention to the wasp, and because they're paying attention to the wasp it takes on the qualities of the wasp and eventually becomes the wasp. So in the same way, if I'm constantly looking at the self, and if my idea, and here being the limited mind. So if think I'm a person, a limited human being, and I am looking at the self and trying to attain the self and putting my attention on the self and trying to get there, eventually what's going to happen is I'm going to become the self. It's going to somebody external, it's going to seem like I have become the self. But actually what's happened is like, it's not like there was any transformation from a physical standpoint, but my sense of identity has shifted. My mind has transformed. Nothing has happened to my body. It's like the mind has essentially realized its own unreality, you could say. And it's not as concrete as I thought it was. It appears and it disappears. It appears and it disappears. And I can go, like my attention can go to the mind, can go to the body, but it can also go to this other place, which is free from the mind and the body. And once we have this capacity to do that, the Sat Chitananda, which is the qualities of the self, becomes accessible. Any thoughts about this?
So Sat was knowledge
Truth.
or existence?
So Sat is truth.
Truth. Truth and Sit?
Chit is existence or consciousness. And Ananda is bliss.
So truth, existence, bliss.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
All right, let's maybe do one more. Tirtva moharnavaham vam hatva ragat dveshadirakshasan yogi shanti samayuktaha atmaramo virajate. So after crossing the ocean of delusion and killing the monsters of likes and dislikes, the yogi who is united with peace becomes Atma Ramana. That is, he comes to revel in himself. Okay, so this is kind of like, continuing what happens after, right? Like we always kind of want to know, oh, what is it like to be self-realized, or what would happen when I do this and I go through this process. And here we have sort of given this sort of experiential peek at what happens. So, after crossing the ocean of delusion, so, that's what happens, which is I have sort of overcome my mind's ignorance, and essentially the mind is kind of, you could say, no longer covering up my perception, and it's kind of gone. And because it's gone, the sort of our problem of liking something and disliking something, which is our sense of attachments and aversions, which is what keeps the mind in place, right? Like I really want to do something and I don't want to do something else. And what is happening in those moments, it's my sense of personhood is getting concretized moment to moment. Like if somebody asks me to do this piece of work at work, do this work which I don't like doing, my sense of, or if I think it's below me somehow, how dare they ask me to do this like trivial work. What's happening is this sense of ego personality is being created in that moment. And if we go through, and if we say, if we sort of continue to like believe that we are this ego, what's going to happen is my belief that I am somehow, let's say, an important person is going to get more rooted and more deeper, right? So like if somebody says, hey, can you do this piece of work for me? And then let's say that work was something like a very like, like a junior person would do. And somehow you think you are a senior person and you're like, how dare they ask me to do this thing? What's happening psychologically is that this idea that I am somehow this smart person or this important person is building, not realizing that's actually what's happening. And we're getting more and more bound by this idea. And our sense of likes and dislikes is getting stronger and stronger. So, but for the person who has crossed this ocean, this whole likes and dislikes is destroyed, because this likes and dislikes is nothing but a consequence of believing in the ego. And once the ego kind of drops, all of these like likes and dislikes also drops. And because these likes and dislikes drops, the background, which is the self, whose qualities are bliss and peace and all of that, shines. So no matter what we do, that's available. And the word we use is Atma Rama. So the word, one of the great beings in the Hindu culture is there's this guy named Rama, which essentially means the person who revels. And one of the words we use in the ending chanting verse also has the word revel in it. And what does that mean? It means that I'm enjoying. And enjoying what? I'm not enjoying any particular object because I had the I could purchase it, or I could buy it, or I could acquire it. All of those things are fine, but what is truly beautiful is like being able to revel without any aspect, without anything. Imagine if we could do that. So this person who has kind of crossed this ocean of delusion unites with this sort of peace that is in the background, and reveling there and being able to just revel without any sort of external influence, and it's available all the time, which is why from this moment onwards, this person is free, because no matter the situation, no matter the external, no matter what the world is like, no matter what maybe the family is going through, no matter, there is this background where they can revel in themselves. And that's the entire purpose of yoga, which is to get to this place. All of the other things you hear is fine, like being able to have a physical fit body and all of that is all right, but this is the true flower of this work. So I hope we can all get there. And this is not a theoretical place. It is possible. And it's been happening for thousands of years, and it's continuing to happen. It's just that, Instagram is unfortunately more popular than, looking good on Instagram is more popular than this work. But there are, thankfully we have been lucky enough to come in contact with this work and pay attention to this. maybe a little bit more than paying attention to Instagram. Cool. I think this is a good place to stop for this class. Any thoughts about this one?
Hey, Praneet. I was just trying to think of a counter example. Like, what would you say to somebody that says, like, I really want to have this travel experience, and then you tell them that that desire is not like, will not satisfy you? Or how would you say, like, how would you compare like a travel experience to like it's the same as you being here in your room right now?
Yeah,
what would you
that's
say?
a good question. So I would say, how strong is that experience, right? Like, so like I rather that desire, like I would, I think in the past we spoke about there's some desires which are just too strong, right? Like I really want to go and go on a backpacking trip across South America. Like that may be like you've read like a lot of like experiences by other people who have done it. You've had some friends who have done it, and so you've been ruminating about this thing, and because of that it's now become a very strong desire. And no matter what you want, no matter what anyone says, you just want to do it. And some desires are too strong to be able to reason and rationalize with, so we just have to do it. And I would say go for it, but do it consciously. Like it doesn't matter what you do, so long as you do it consciously. And by conscious, I mean while you're doing something, pay attention to what is happening. If you're traveling, pay attention to the traveling. If you're, talking to somebody, pay attention when you're talking to that person. Everything becomes about being in the now, and not sort of like putting your mind into like an imaginary place, which is, on the phone or like in the virtual world, or in, where we kind of naturally go unconscious, or like, mindlessly watching TV. Like those things also can be done consciously. So it's not like I'm saying don't go and like, browse Instagram, or don't go and watch Netflix, but do it consciously, which is you're only giving that activity attention. And then you can do whatever you want. So if you want to go and travel, go for it, but do it consciously. And then you'll start to realize that whatever I'm seeking is right here. And we use this world as a way to come to that place. And we can do it, through meditation, we can do it through traveling, we can do it through any activity. But if we can kind of be consciously doing any activity, we would all come to the same place, which is there is this background, which is available all the time. And I can use traveling as a means to get there. I can use, dating as a means to get there. I can use working and being successful at work as a means to get there. But it's all a means. So I wouldn't try to suppress desires or like rationalize my way out of it, but just see that how strong is this desire, and am I trying to suppress it? And if I'm trying to suppress it, that's probably not helpful. I would say if you have the means to go travel, or if you have a friend, you were talking about a friend, if you have a friend who wants to go for it, let them go for it. But if they can do it consciously, then they would probably have a better travel experience. And then the other side effect is that they will realize that it's actually them, which is actually, what they're really seeking, which is this state of feeling, what happens when you travel? Like your mind is a little bit free, right? Like that's what we're seeking, this free mind, not, the travel. The travel is just a means to get to that place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, it's, travel is one thing, but there's all these other, any desire is essentially seeking that place in our mind, which is being a little free, being, being at peace, I would say. That's like the basis. And then, on top of that, we want to color it with like various experiences and experience this world. And that's just natural to want to do that. But key is like, don't be clear about, like, or be honest about how strong the desire is. Are you trying to suppress it? Are you like trying to rationalize it? And be clear about that. Cool. Any other thoughts? If not, we can do a meditation. Okay, so if you're not sitting up, try and sit upright and close your eyes. And let's start this meditation by taking a few breaths, conscious breaths. Even an activity like breathing can be done consciously if we just pay attention. And it doesn't necessarily have to be on the breath itself, but just on the entire, could be the entire body, or it could be the sense of awareness, reversing this attention from stuff to where is it that this attention is arising from. And even breathe, and while breathing, just noticing all the different aspects of breathing. Could be the sensations, could be the air going into your nostrils, lungs expanding. Keep taking a few breaths, like long and conscious breaths. And notice that when you're breathing and inhaling, and before the inhale and the next exhale, there's a gap. And then before the next exhale and the next inhale is also a gap. And in this gap, there's a certain space. The space of silence. And just notice it. Don't try to project anything on it. So just keep breathing and just keep noticing these gaps. keep continuing to pay attention to the breathing. Keep paying attention to the gaps. And see when you reach the gap or the moment of the gap, you can get a sense of the space that opens up, space of consciousness, of silence. And then when the breathing starts, how the space continues. But now you can experience the breathing. Slowly bring your attention back to objective phenomena. When you're ready, you may open your eyes. End the class with our chant. Share my screen. Okay. Yogarato va bhogarato va yogarato va bhogarato va sangarato va sangavihina sangarato va sangavihina yasya brahmani ramate chittam yasya brahmani ramate chittam nandati nandati nandatyeva nandati nandati Nandatyeva Nandati Nandati Nandatyeva. So the English for this is the purpose of our work, which is to revel in yoga or to revel in seeking pleasure, which is bhoga. Let one seek enjoyment in company or in solitude, but only that person who knows how to revel in the self truly enjoys. So this kind of is to the question for you, Stella, which is, it doesn't matter, do the things that you want to do. Like, I think that's why we are born, to fulfill our desires. Go for it without fear, without hesitation, just go for it. But know with the knowledge that, whatever happens, it doesn't change who you are. Let it be successful, let it be unsuccessful, but you remain unchanged. And when you do experience the bliss and the joy of traveling, or of any other experiences, you're experiencing the self. Own that bliss, and that's kind of what we're learning to do: owning the bliss and doing the things that we love without fear, and go for it. That's all I can say. That's it for today. And I guess, like, one more thing, we learned about reveling. The word was ramana. So in this verse as well, I think the word here was ramate. So, reveling. So remember that we have this possibility of reveling with just ourselves. And whenever we are, feeling joy or ecstasy or happiness in this world through any external experiences, notice that the mind is free from desire, and our own self nature is shining and peeping through. And own it, because once we start owning our own pleasure and bliss, we will the hold that the world has over us will start to loosen. And that's the whole purpose of loosening the grip of this world. And once the world becomes a little loose, then it's very, very easy to get to the place that this book is talking about. So I hope it happens. If you have any questions or thoughts, I'm happy to hang out. But that's the end of the class today.